Incident response is necessary for rapidly detecting incidents and restoring computing services after a security event. To assist organizations in establishing computer security incident response capabilities and handling, the National Institute of Standards and Technology created the NIST SP800 61R2 publication, which is a guide for computer security incident handling. If you follow the link in the resources for this lecture, it will take you to a PDF version of this guide. Now let's take a look at the incident response process. Handling an incident should include 4 major phases: preparation, detection and analysis, containment, eradication and recovery, and post-incident activity. The preparation phase is used to make sure that you have your ducks in a row in case there is an incident. Some key examples would be equipment for analyzing compromised devices and the proper communication channels. Jump kits can be built with all of the necessary tools so that you and your team are ready to quickly respond to an incident. The detection and analysis phase can be difficult due to there being so many event types and source technologies. Here are some NIST recommendations for making incident analysis easier and more effective. Things like network profiling, understanding normal behaviors with anomaly detection, log retention policies, event correlation, and among other things, keeping accurate time to make sure that you can properly correlate events. Next, we have the containment, eradication, and recovery phase. This phase is primarily used to prevent additional damages, preserve evidence, and to maintain network availability. As you'd expect, the faster you can discover the attacking host and contain it, the better off you are. The longer a compromised host is on the network, the more time the attacker has to spread and create backdoors on the network. You'll want to look for logins throughout the network and logs during the time of the attack to make sure that the attacker didn't compromise other hosts on the network. Once an incident has been contained, evidence should be collected and documented with information such as computer identifications and collection details, especially since you may need it for legal proceedings. After the storm clears, eradication may be necessary to eliminate components of the incident, such as deleting malware and disabling breached user accounts, as well as identifying and mitigating all vulnerabilities that were exploited. For some incidents, eradication is either not necessary or is performed during recovery. In recovery, administrators restore systems to normal operation, confirm that the systems are functioning normally, and remediate vulnerabilities to prevent similar incidents. The last step in the incident response process is the post-incident analysis. This phase is used to take a step back and assess why the incident happened and what your organization could have done differently to improve their incident response process. This can be accomplished by holding internal meetings to discuss lessons learned and update processes accordingly. In the last video, we covered the fundamentals of creating an incident response plan. The next step, after your incident response plan has been created, is to form an internal Computer Security Incident Response Team. An incident response team is responsible for providing incident response services to part or all of your organization. The team receives information on possible incidents, investigates them, and takes action to ensure that the damage caused by the incidents are minimized. This team could be in-house members from your organization's security team, or it can even be outsourced to an external group like a managed security service provider. MSSPs are companies that provide incident response and managed security services. Some ISPs, like AT&T and CenturyLink, offer these services, and even Cisco has an incident response service. At the national level, CS, IRTs, and CERT, Computer Emergency Response Teams, work together to help protect partners and citizens from cybersecurity threats. The US CERT, for example, is used to protect all Americans by responding to major incidents, analyzing threats, and exchanging critical cybersecurity information with trusted partners around the world. The US CERT's critical mission activities include providing cybersecurity protection to federal civilians, developing timely and actionable information, responding to incidents and analyzing data about emerging cyber threats, and collaborating with foreign governments and international entities to enhance the nation's cybersecurity posture. One well-known CERT is the coordination center used at the Software Engineering Institute. They help solve cybersecurity problems by working with software vendors to resolve software vulnerabilities. They even work with organizations such as the FBI and the Homeland Security Department. The more information that is available for your networks and hosts, the easier it will be when it comes to incident response time. Profiling data provides a complete view of all of the information the system has gathered about a network or host. In this lecture, we are going to take a look at different profiling methods that can be used to provide contextual data to detect and even prevent incidents. Throughput is the measure of how much data is successfully transferred between network hosts. So if you send a file between two computers and the rate of the transfer is 50 megabits per second, then that would be the throughput. Throughput utilization can be an indicator that there has been a security incident if it is monitored. Network management servers can collect this data historically, so a baseline can be created. If the NMS reports that a remote site had an average throughput of 30 megabits per second for a year, and then all of a sudden the site spikes to 100 megabits per second, then you would want to investigate that network. Of course, just because there is a large increase in traffic doesn't necessarily mean that there has been a security incident, but it is possible. Session duration is another important thing to watch out for on a network. Really long sessions to hosts could be a sign of a misbehaving client on the network. Most sessions shouldn't last past a typical 8-hour workday, but if an attacker has a backdoor to the network, then they may stay connected for long periods of time. One easy way you can check for session durations is by looking at your firewall's connection statistics. So here I am logged into my Cisco Firepower device. That's my internet gateway in the lab. And just by running the command show connection detail, just like you could on the ASA platform, you can see connection or session details. So I can see how long these connections are idle for, and as well as their uptime, which is what I'm looking for. So like this one, for example, is 4 days long. That might be one I want to look into. That seems a little unordinary to me. It could be legit traffic, but I mean, any connections or sessions that are up for more than a day straight might be something you want to look at to make sure that you don't have any CNC connections or any type of backdoors connected on your network. Knowing what wired devices are connected to your network is a big part of network security. Since most wired networks do not require authentication or authorization for access, it is an easy in for an attacker. Small, low-profile devices like Raspberry Pis can be easily tucked away and remain connected to the network for years without anyone noticing. There are even devices that can be used that are disguised as equipment like power strips and power chargers. To control what is plugged into a network, a NAC solution like Cisco ICE can be implemented. ICE has the ability to profile what types of devices are connecting to the network and permit or deny endpoints based on posture. A common ICE rule set would be to only let company-owned devices gain full network access, and then all other devices would only get limited access. So just to give you a basic idea of what I mean when I talk about wired authentication and authorization, I'm going to show you a switch port that I have configured for authentication that actually talks to Cisco ICE to verify if users or devices should be allowed on the network. So it's quite the long configuration, but basically all these authentication commands are tweaking the switch port, saying, hey, when something plugs into this switch port, I want to authenticate them with .1x or MAC address authentication. So right now I have a phone and a computer that's plugged into the phone, plugged into this port. So if I run the command show authentication session and then interface F1012, then I can see the authentication and authorization status of my devices. So let's take a look at this. So here, this shows the username of the computer that's plugged into the back of the phone. Its MAC address, its IP address. It looks like it's authenticated properly, and it received this downloadable access list from ICE. So I don't want to get too crazy into the details here because knowing how to configure this stuff really isn't required for the CyberOps exam. I just want to share with you as much information as possible so you have a better understanding of how this all ties together. So basically my computer's authenticated and all happy in the data domain, and then I have my phone in the voice domain that has also received this permit any downloadable access list. So you saw the switch port configuration. Now to actually talk to ICE, we have some AAA commands that are set globally. So for example, I have this AAA authentication .1x, and then I say, hey, for .1x requests, I want you to talk to this group. And that radius ICE group basically has the IP address of my ICE server so that it knows to send radius requests for wired authentication to the ICE server. So here I am in the ICE server. I just want to give you a quick look into what the policies look like. When someone plugs into a switch port and the switch sends their username or MAC address to ICE, what is it going to do to that device? Is it going to deny access to the switch, or is it going to push an access list to the switch to apply to the switch port? So let's take a look at my wired access policy here. So just a few examples here. I have a MAC address list here basically so that if a device like a phone doesn't have the capability to actually send like username login information, then I just check its MAC address against a list that I've compiled. If it doesn't match that, then it looks for either Active Directory user credentials or a certificate or something. And at this point, if it passes authentication and is a valid username and password, then how is it authorized to access the network? So you authenticate successfully. Then we go down here, and in ICE you can get crazy with authorization policies. It's actually one of the bigger parts of the configuration. I could send a user to a guest portal if I wanted to when they plug into a wired port, give them limited access, or if they're a company-owned asset and a valid domain user, then give them full access. So now you can see with a NAC solution like ICE, you can truly secure what is connected to the network so that a hacker couldn't come in off the street and go plug into a lobby switch port to gain access to the network. Segmenting IP networks and VLANs based on security levels is obviously a best practice. For example, guest users should not be on the same network as internal servers that run critical roles in the environment. IP address planning can take a lot of thought to make sure that address space is allocated for scalability and security. In the last video, we talked about network profiling. Another method of profiling is server profiling. Server profiling information consists of things like what ports the server is listening on, logged in users, running processes and tasks, as well as applications. By tracking this type of information, a contextual view of network hosts would be available for incident response, investigations, and anomaly detection. Let's hop in the lab and we'll go through how to identify this profiling information on Microsoft and Linux servers. Alright, so here I am on a Microsoft Windows server. First I'll show you the listening ports on this server. So if you go to Start and then either search for command prompt or just pick it from the shortcuts here. Okay, so the command we're going to run is net stat, and then we'll do -a. So before I hit enter here, I know there's going to be a long list of listening ports, so I'm going to first increase my buffer size for my window so that I can scroll all the way to the top so you can see everything. So I'll right click on the window, go to Properties, Layout, and then hit enter, and I should be able to go back to the top. So here you can see all the listening ports. We have port 80 for HTTP, 88 for Kerberos, 389 for LDAP, and so on. Secure LDAP. So as you can see, that's a really easy way just to understand what ports are being listened on your servers. So a good thing to do for any server environment would be to have some documentation on what ports are being listened on each of your servers, and make sure to block any ports that you don't want the server to be listening on in the Windows firewall. Okay, so next we can actually find the rest of the profiling information we were looking for by simply going to the task manager. So I'll just go below the taskbar here, right click somewhere, and then click Task Manager. So as you can see here, we have our applications that are running on this server, processes, services, as well as the logged in users. So this shows that there's an administrator user logged in, which is me, via an RDP session. So that does it for Windows, but now let's jump over to a Linux server to find the same information. Alright, so here I am on my Linux server. I'm going to go to the terminal and we'll start off by looking for listening ports. You can actually use the netstat command just like we did in Windows, except there's some different options. So I'm going to add the listening ports and the flags for UDP as well as TCP. And it looks like the only listening port on this server is UDP 68 for DHCP. To identify users logged into a Linux machine, you can run the W command. And as I expected, the only user logged in to this Linux box is myself as the root user. Next, to see the running processes on a Linux server, you can run the command top. And as you can see the process ID information, users tied to each process, as well as CPU and memory usage. And then to check all the running applications on the server, I can use the command ps-e. And there I have my documentation on my applications running on the system. The PCI Data Security Standard is for organizations that handle credit cards from the major card schemes. Basically, PCI is a set of rules to follow if your company processes payments. The type of data that is supposed to be protected by PCI compliance are things like cardholder names, PINs, and account numbers. The first PCI standard, PCI 1.0, was released in 2004. The latest version is PCI 3.2. The latest requirements can be found on the PCI Security Standards website. Currently, there are 12 requirements. To view the detailed PCI Security Standards document from the home page, you can actually click on Document Library and then click on View Document for PCI DSS version 3.2. Click on PCI DSS. For the CyberOps exam, you of course do not need to memorize the entire PCI DSS document, but I would at least go over the high-level overview of the 12 PCI DSS requirements and commit those to memory. And also make sure you know the different types of cardholder data listed on page 7. So those are two big things that I would focus on. Of course, go through the whole guide. There's some really good stuff about network segmentation, as well as best practices for implementing PCI. Really, the best way to be PCI compliant is to create a dedicated PCI environment for any PCI systems. Then you only have to maintain PCI compliance for a small portion of your network. HIPAA was created to regulate how healthcare data is secured to protect health information. Any healthcare organization that handles medical information should be HIPAA compliant. The first thing you should know about HIPAA is the privacy rule. If you go to hhs.gov/HIPAA, you can review the HIPAA documentation. From the main page, you can find privacy rule. The purpose of the HIPAA privacy rule is to address the use and disclosure of individuals' health information. A major goal of the privacy rule is to assure that individuals' health information is properly protected while allowing the flow of health information needed to provide and promote high-quality health care and to protect the public's health and well-being. The next HIPAA rule you should understand is the security rule. The security rule establishes a national set of security standards for protecting certain health information that is held or transferred in electronic form. The last HIPAA fundamental you should know are the safeguards that are used to check if an organization is compliant. HIPAA safeguards are broken up into 3 categories: administrative, physical, and technical. Both of these links are available as resources in this lecture, so if you would like to review some more of the HIPAA documentation, you can access it from there. The SOX Act was created to enforce regulations within publicly held companies, qualifying international organizations, and financial service companies. The 3 SOX sections that you should be concerned about for the exam are sections 302, 404, and 409. Section 302 talks about corporate responsibility for financial reports. Section 404 is for management assessment of internal controls. And Section 409 is for real-time issuer disclosures. If an organization needs to be SOX compliant, then they need to make sure that they have the following audit requirements. Specifically, SOX sections 302, 404, and 409 must be monitored, logged, and audited. So we have internal controls, network activity, database activity, login activities such as success and failures, account activity, user activity, and information access. Both of these links are available in the resources for this lecture, so if you would like to review more SOX information, you can do so from there. In this section, we are going to focus on learning more about data and event analysis. To effectively analyze data, it needs to be normalized. Normalization is the process of reorganizing data so that it can be viewed in one form. This eliminates redundant data and minimizes the chance that an attacker can evade detection. Data normalization can be categorized into 3 types: 1NF, 2NF, and 3NF. Cisco's firepower security devices use normalization preprocessors to normalize traffic after packet decoding. From the Firepower Management Center, if you go to Policies, Access Control, and Intrusion, you can edit your IPS policy, which includes preprocessors for normalization. So here I have my IPS policy. I'll click the pencil icon to edit it. You can get to the IPS preprocessor rules by going under Policy Information and selecting Rules. And preprocessors. So as you can see in the preprocessor section, there's a list of configuration options for popular protocols such as DNS, FTP, and HTTP. With so many data types to analyze, it is important to have a way to interpret information in a universal format. SIM systems meet this need with the ability to collect event data in multiple forms. Just to give you an idea of what type of event correlation can be done on a SIM, we're going to take a look at a SolarWinds SIM server. So here's just the SolarWinds demo server that you can log into. And under the Monitor tab, with the Security option, you can see a list of security events. So I'll click on that. If you look through here, in the Tool Alias column, you can see the different sources of these events. So we have Windows logon events, firewall denied connections, as well as viruses that have been detected from the Microtrend Office Scan tool. So as you can see, we have all of these different tools feeding in information, and we can view everything from a central management point within the SIM system. To help the security community speak a common language when referencing security data, VERIS was created. VERIS is a set of metrics designed to provide a common language for describing security incidents in a structured and reputable manner. If you would like to read into VERIS more, I have the link available in the resources for this lecture. A 5-tuple refers to a set of 5 different values that are used to analyze security events. It includes a source IP address and port number, destination IP address and port number, and the protocol used. In this example, the top host had IP address 10.0.1.11, used source port 65001, TCP protocol as its transport, with the destination IP address of 10.0.1.12 and destination port of 445. Let's take a look at a couple of examples of how you could find your 5-tuple information for connections between hosts. So here I am in Wireshark, and let's say that I was investigating an issue with an endpoint. If I wanted to correlate 5-tuple information, I could easily do so from here. So let's say I wanted to find out the information for this connection from my PC to this destination address. I could just double click on that connection. I can see the source and destination IP addresses. I can see the transport protocol was TCP, as well as the source port number and destination port number. Another useful place to know how to find 5-tuple information is from a firewall log. Here I am in the lab with a Cisco firewall. There are a few different ways you can find your 5-tuple information. What I like to do is run the command show connection detail. And here you have a nice summary of all your connections, as well as your IP address information, transport protocol, and port numbers. So if I wanted to drill down into a suspicious connection, let's say regarding this IP address, I could just filter to that destination to collect 5-tuple information. Retrospective events take place when there is a change in a prior event. With firepower, if the system learns that a file's malware disposition has changed, these are called retrospective malware events. A file disposition is the status of a file after it has been analyzed by Cisco's cloud database. So a file's disposition could be unknown initially, but later on, as the AMP cloud learns more about the file, it could determine that it was actually a bad file and trigger a retrospective event that would consider the file malicious and block any future transfers for that file. Now I'll hop into a Firepower Management Center to show you where you can look at retrospective file events. So here I am in the Firepower Management Center. If you go to Analysis, Files, and Network File Trajectory, it shows you files that have the disposition of malware. So I'll just click on one of these files. So for a retrospective event, the trajectory would show that a file entered the network, was transferred between hosts, and at the beginning of the file trajectory history, the file would actually show as unknown or clean. And if the AMP cloud determined that the file was malicious after the file was actually on the network, it would send a retrospective event, which would be shown by this symbol in the trajectory, letting you know that the file initially wasn't considered to be malicious, but then was due to further analysis. Tying different event data together to identify compromised hosts and threat actors can be challenging. With next-generation devices like Firepower, you can easily map data together like IP addresses, DNS requests, and HTTP URLs. Now let's hop in the lab and we'll take a look at how you could use firepower event information to identify compromised hosts and threat actors on your network by simulating a malicious connection. For this example, I'm going to use a malware test link to trigger a blocked connection on the network. I like to use the wicar.org test site, which I will provide the link for in the resources for this lecture. It just has a collection of some downloadable payloads that you can use to test to make sure that your malware defenses are working properly. So if I click on this test virus here, of course I get blocked since my firepower device is doing what it's supposed to be doing. And you can see here actually, I didn't even get a chance to connect to the HTTP site to download the test file because firepower blocked the actual DNS request to resolve the IP address of this website where I would download the virus. So I'm actually going to disable my DNS blocks so that we see all the connection information to help us analyze the connection. So to disable these security intelligence DNS blocks, I can go to policies, access control, and then DNS. And then I'll just disable these DNS blacklist rules just as a temporary thing for this example. Save it, and now I'll deploy the new policy to my firepower sensor in the lab. And then I'll start the video back up once that's done deploying, and then we should be able to resolve the test malware site so that we get a full picture of the connections traversing the firepower devices. Okay, now that the policy has successfully been pushed to my firepower device, I should be able to resolve the web page that is going to be used to download this test payload here. So let me try it again. Okay, so it was still blocked, but let's see if I'm at least able to resolve it. Alright, there you go. So that tells me that DNS is allowing the connection through, but my URL filtering blacklist blocked the connection. So that's good. My device is doing what it's supposed to be doing. Let's go to Analyze Connections and Events. And then I edited my search to filter on anything destined to the IP address that I resolved for malware.wicar.org. And as you can see here, I see my host IP address as the potentially compromised host, destined to the threat actor IP address as the responder IP, and the website where the malware was attempted to be downloaded from at malware.wicar.org, and then the file name. So right here in this one line, I have the compromised host, the threat actor, and the HTTP data so that I know what site was trying to be accessed from the compromised host. The Firepower Management Console can be configured with correlation policies that can send alerts and even take action if specific events that you define are triggered. To help show you how you can build correlation rules to distinguish significant alerts, I'm going to get into the Lab Firepower Management Center to build a correlation rule. Alright, so to start off with our correlation policies, we're going to want to go to Policies and then Correlation. Okay, so before I create a correlation policy, first I want to make my rule that will be used to match on an event. So I'll go to the Rule Management tab and then Create Rule. So for this example, I'm going to create a correlation for if there are any malware events. So I'll call this rule malware events. So here we have intrusion events. You can match on discovery. So you could actually trigger an event on if Firepower noticed that there was a new subnet introduced to the Firepower topology, user, host, connection. But I'm going to select a malware event occurs. And then I'm going to select a network-based malware detection because I have Firepower appliances within the lab network and I don't have the AMP N-based solution within the lab, so I'm just going to match on network-based malware detection. And then if you want it to be more specific, if you hit this drop down, you could choose things like which application protocol you want it to match on, file type, IP addressing. I'm going to choose the disposition, which is the status of the file. Is it a clean file, unknown, or malware? And then is malware is the default option. So I just want to know if any network-based malware events occur in my network, I want it to be notified. So I'll hit save. So we have our rule, which is the event we're matching on. And then ultimately, when we create our policy, that's going to say if this event occurs, we're going to apply this action. So we haven't created our action yet. So let's go ahead and do that. We'll go to actions and then alerts. As you can see here, I already have a syslog alert defined, but for this example, we'll create an SNMP alert. So I'll say SNMP, my trap server IP address, and then my SNMP information. I'm using SNMP version 3. That's kind of lame that you can only select DES. I would think that on a secure device like this you could pick AES something, but it's only SNMP, so no big deal. Hit save. Alright, now that we have our alert created, as you can see here, it shows that it's not in use, but it is enabled. So once we create our policy and tie our rule and alert together, it'll show as in use. So we'll go back to policies and correlation. And we'll create a new correlation policy. Alright, so I'll call this malware policy. And then we have to add our rule to it. So we'll choose our malware events rule, click add. So now that this policy knows what to match on, we have to give it a response. So we'll go here to the responses edit button, and then we'll assign a response to it. So I'll select my SNMP alert I created, push it up, and hit update. Alright, so that's it. Now we have our malware policy defined in Firepower so that we can be alerted if there are any significant malware events. The cyber kill chain model is basically a flow of the security event phases. At the top of the kill chain is the reconnaissance phase. It is used to collect as much information as possible from the target systems. Common things to discover are operating systems, network information, and user data like email addresses. The weaponization phase is used to create deliverable payloads based on the information learned from the reconnaissance attack. For example, if an attacker knew that the target had public-facing Windows web servers, then they would create a malicious payload that could exploit Windows web-based vulnerabilities. Once an attacker has weaponized a payload, they need to find a way to deliver it. This could be done with a USB flash drive, a web page, or an email. Phishing attacks are probably the easiest form of delivery. Once the malicious payload is delivered, then the vulnerabilities that were identified during the weaponization phase can be exploited to execute code on the victim's system. The most difficult part of the kill chain is the actual installation of malware. Since most machines have antivirus and anti-malware, well-known malware should be blocked in most cases. But with zero-day attacks that are ahead of security software updates, malware can still find a way to be installed. Depending on the type of malware that is installed, the kill chain may stop at the installation phase. However, if an attacker wants to do more than just installing malware to cause harm to a system, then CNC command and control communication can be established. CNC programs can be used to connect to an attacker's server so that they can remotely send commands to the compromised host. Once they have remote control, they have hands-on keyboard access, making an action objective possible. Cisco actually has a security portfolio that offers solutions to provide protection across the kill chain. If you scroll through this webpage, you'll see that Cisco has provided security solutions to protect against each kill chain phase. For example, such as StealthWatch, email and web security devices, as well as AMP anti-malware protection. As far as the exam's concerned, I would focus on simply memorizing each phase in the kill chain.